Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. My name is Michael Howard, aged 52 at the time of the events recounted here. I was happily married to a woman I cherished, with 2 well-raised grown children, and I held a fulfilling, well-paying job. Life seemed to be sailing smoothly until it took an unexpected turn. The unraveling began on a nondescript Tuesday evening. I lingered a bit longer than usual at work, but not to a degree that would raise concern with my wife. As the rush hour traffic eased, I made my way home, adhering to my customary routine. Tuesdays meant Chinese takeout, a joint decision we had made. I dutifully stopped, collected on my way back. Upon arriving home, I pressed the button to lower the garage door, grabbed my briefcase and the evening sustenance, and entered the house. It was a scene reminiscent of a typical Tuesday, with me playing the role of the provider, returning to our modern-day cave to appease my partner's hunger. However, a slight deviation caught my attention. My wife's car was conspicuously absent from its usual spot. I dismissed it as her possibly running a spontaneous errand, assuming she'd return shortly. Leaving the food on the kitchen table, I hoped to preserve its warmth, prepared to reheat it in the microwave if her delay persisted. I strolled down the hallway toward the front entrance, then made a turn at the stairs, ascending to our bedroom to change into something more relaxing. This routine was typical for me on a weeknight: return home, slip into comfort, and indulge in a meal. 10 minutes later, I descended the stairs and called out, "Mia, are you back?" Silence greeted me. Pondering her absence, I mused, where could she have gone? Perhaps she left a message. There was no sense of panic, just a growing curiosity. Entering the living room, my eyes fell upon the coffee table where I found it. It wasn't the note I anticipated, but rather one that I could never have fathomed. It read, "Dear Mike, I regret having to do this, but there's someone who urgently needs me. I received their call today, the kind that demands an immediate response. I'm sorry to leave without warning, and I understand this will be challenging for you. Please believe that my love for you surpasses everything, and I'll be back as soon as possible. I hold our life together dear, and I hope to resume it soon. Please don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself. Your loving wife." The letter she left sat innocuously next to her cell phone on the coffee table, a juxtaposition that only deepened my sense of bewilderment and unease. Confusion gripped me as I grappled with the enigmatic contents of her note. Someone who needs her, but who could that be? And why the secrecy? With each passing moment, panic tightened its grip. Where has she vanished to? How could it be so urgent that she couldn't even provide a hint? Why abandon her phone? When will I hear from her? This wasn't the typical note a wife leaves her husband when planning a late return. Panic soon yielded to fear, then simmered into anger. How could she leave like this, without a proper explanation of her whereabouts or intentions? Darker thoughts began to surface. Why abandon her phone? What could possibly justify such an action? As the questions multiplied, a sense of foreboding settled in, leaving me to grapple with the unsettling silence and uncertainty that now permeated the room. I read her letter again, hoping for some clarity, but it remained as cryptic as before. There is someone who needs me. I got their call today. It's one of those calls that you have to answer when it comes. Anger surged within me. Who does she think she is? She's not a secret agent, not a super spy, not the surgeon to world leaders. Where could she possibly be? Yet beneath the anger lay a deeper concern. I feared for her safety. I was certain she needed my help wherever she was. I longed to reach out to her, to hear her voice, and reassure myself of her well-being, but I had no means of contacting her. As the evening wore on, and dinner grew cold, I found myself stuck in a loop of worry and frustration. Eventually, darkness descended, adding to the weight of uncertainty. It was well past nightfall when I finally made the decision to reach out. I called her sister, our friends, and eventually our children. Yet, no one had any answers, or perhaps they weren't willing to share. My attempts only succeeded in alarming our kids further. I tried to downplay the situation, but my own anxiety betrayed me. I left them with a promise to keep them updated, but deep down, I knew I had only added to their distress. Now, anger mingled with guilt as I blamed her for causing unnecessary worry, even though I had played a part in it myself. I scrutinized the letter once more. I cherish the life we have made together, and I hope to return to it when I can. Those words didn't suggest a swift return. Fear gripped me tighter, and though I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Attempting to quell my rising panic, I dialed the hospital. No sign of her. Next, I contacted the police, only to be met with the frustrating news that I couldn't file a missing persons report until 48 hours had passed, unless it involved a child. The absurdity of reporting a grown woman as missing, especially one who could easily pass for a decade younger, left me feeling helpless and frustrated. I thanked the authorities and hung up, no closer to finding her. I forced myself to eat, but the food held no appeal. I stored the uneaten meal in the fridge, then settled in the dimly lit living room, hoping against hope for her return. But the hours passed, and she remained absent. Exhaustion finally claimed me, and I dragged myself upstairs to bed, where sleep eluded me. The following morning, I woke to the cold emptiness of her side of the bed. Reality crashed over me anew, and I lay there, grappling with the overwhelming uncertainty of her whereabouts. I called work to notify them of my absence. My uncharacteristic absence raised concern among my colleagues, prompting a barrage of calls checking on my well-being and offering assistance. Engaging with them briefly provided a welcome distraction from my mounting worries, though the relief was only temporary. I attempted to reach her office, only to be informed that she had called in and taken some time off. Initially, I entertained suspicions of withheld information, but as days passed, it became apparent that even her workplace was as clueless as I was. Despite multiple visits in hopes of gaining insights through face-to-face discussions, their knowledge mirrored my own, virtually non-existent. Realizing her absence since Tuesday only on Tuesday night, I adhered to the 48-hour protocol before heading to the police station on Friday morning to file a missing persons report. Presenting her note, I faced inquiries about prior occurrences of such behavior. Though maintaining composure under such stress is advisable, I found myself teetering on the edge. Threatened with charges if I didn't restrain my emotions, I reluctantly settled into a chair, avoiding any perception of being a volatile suspect. Upon completing the paperwork, the officers nonchalantly suggested the cliché scenario of a spouse absconding with a lover, adding insult to injury. Suppressing the urge to lash out, I left with a bitter, "Thanks for nothing," as my only retort. The supposed motto of, "to protect and serve," felt hollow in that moment. Returning home, I slumped into a chair, feeling the weight of stress bearing down on me, threatening to unravel my composure. With no constructive action to take, I resumed my calls to friends and relatives, making a conscious decision to shield our children from unnecessary worry. However, they beat me to it, reaching out to inquire about their mother's whereabouts. In a heart-wrenching moment, I reassured them with a fabricated confidence, masking the turmoil brewing within me. Deceiving my own flesh and blood felt like a betrayal of the highest order. How does one navigate such a conversation with children whose concerns are entirely justified? As the night progressed into Wednesday, my initial outreach prompted a deluge of incoming calls from concerned loved ones. Initially benign, these inquiries morphed into palpable anxiety by Thursday, with demands for updates on my efforts to locate Mia. By Friday, some calls bore a thinly veiled hint of accusation, hinting at the erosion of goodwill. If the barrage of calls on Friday felt suffocating, Saturday's onslaught of visitors was nearly unbearable. Friends and family descended upon me, initially offering words of solace before probing into uncomfortable territory. Questions about our relationship, potential discord, and Mia's state of mind became a relentless barrage. Yet, a final blow came from Mia's own mother, her voice trembling with fear as she dared to ask the unthinkable. "Are you absolutely certain you have no idea where she could be?" I erupted in a fit of anger, a rare occurrence in my relationship with my mother-in-law, Peggy. "What on earth are you insinuating, Peggy? Do you honestly believe I'd fabricate something as serious as this?" "No, Mike, of course not. It's just—" Her voice trailed off, leaving a tense silence hanging in the air. "For heaven's sake, Peggy, just say it," I demanded, meeting my gaze with a look that seared into my memory. Peggy uttered words that pierced through me. "It's just that she's never behaved like this before." Suppressing my rage and sorrow, I buried my emotions beneath a facade of calmness. "Do you think I'm unaware of that?" I responded evenly. Peggy trembled visibly, her husband attempting to diffuse the tension. "Mike, we understand you're doing everything you can. Can you please share what you do know? Perhaps we can brainstorm together." I acquiesced with a nod, and we sat in solemn silence as I recounted the scant information I possessed, primarily emphasizing the absence of concrete leads. Sharing Mia's farewell letter only deepened our collective confusion and concern. As accusations dissolved into shared anguish, we spent an agonizing hour grappling with the inexplicable void left by Mia's sudden disappearance, yet found ourselves grasping at straws, devoid of any semblance of an explanation. Thomas and Peggy graciously lingered into the afternoon as I busied myself preparing a modest lunch, anticipating a quiet gathering among the three of us. However, our home became an impromptu hub of activity, with a continuous stream of well-meaning friends arriving at our doorstep, bearing trays of food and cases of beer. Each visitor sought answers, eager to understand what had transpired and what information I possessed. Eventually, I grew weary of recounting the events, and it was then that Peggy and Thomas intervened. To Peggy's credit, she abandoned any hint of blame, offering instead unwavering support and commendation for my concerns as a husband. Though I knew doubt lingered in the minds of many, their outward display of solidarity provided a much-needed sense of reassurance. I was emotionally drained as sympathetic acquaintances took turns expressing their solidarity and worry. I urged them to reach out to the authorities if any recollections surfaced that could aid in the search, yet privately harbored suspicions that someone held information they weren't divulging. I silently hoped that any pertinent details would eventually find their way to the authorities, even if I remained ignorant of them. However, for weeks, it seemed as though the investigation stagnated, with no significant developments. Then, exactly 2 weeks later, there was a minor breakthrough. The police had added my wife's car details to their list of potentially stolen vehicles. Whenever I voiced my wish for her car's discovery, accompanied by the hope it might lead to her whereabouts, I noticed subtle exchanges of skepticism among those present. I understood their unspoken doubts. The prevailing assumption seemed to be that Mia had fled voluntarily, and even if located, might choose not to return home. Attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy, I reluctantly ventured into work, only to find myself utterly ineffectual, prompting colleagues to urge me to return home. Yet even within the familiar confines of my own residence, I found myself engulfed in a cloud of helplessness. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of futile efforts, making fruitless calls, scouring the streets in search of her car, and entertaining paranoid thoughts of friends harboring her, though the notion seemed preposterous. Each passing day brought mounting anxiety and frustration as my relentless pursuit yielded no results. Driven to the brink of desperation, I sought counsel from my lawyer, who recommended engaging a private investigator, citing my legal prerogative. While the authorities begrudgingly acknowledged this right, their disapproval was palpable, cautioning against potential interference with their official proceedings. Faced with their admission of having no substantive leads, I bluntly reminded them that the addition of a private investigator wouldn't impede their existing fruitless efforts. Though they bristled at my candor, they conceded to my decision. However, the private investigator's findings mirrored the police's, a disheartening void of information. As the weeks dragged on, My routine remained unchanged. Incessant calls, aimless drives, and vigilant monitoring of news updates. Yet a glimmer of hope emerged when, 2 weeks into Mia's disappearance, I uncovered a withdrawal from an ATM located 200 miles away. Hastily alerting the authorities reignited their scrutiny, prompting the arrival of detectives at my doorstep, ushering in a resurgence of suspicion and uncertainty. With a simmering sense of indignation boiling beneath the surface, I finally mustered the composure to confront them directly. No, I did not venture to that town and utilize that ATM, I asserted, my voice tinged with a controlled fury that bordered on explosive. I've been here in this town every moment. While you sit idle, I've been tirelessly searching, calling, and doing far more than any of you. Now that you have a lead, get off your lethargic backsides and pursue it. Their evident disdain for me was palpable, but I remained resolute in my determination, utterly indifferent to their opinions. After a protracted half-hour of exchanged assurances and tacit insinuations, they begrudgingly departed. To their merit, they promptly notified the authorities in the town where the ATM transaction occurred, catalyzing a breakthrough. 2 days later, the pivotal discovery ensued when Maya's car was located in a hospital parking lot. The local police reached out to me with a directive: "Don't intervene. Let us handle this." My response was unequivocal. "Like hell," I retorted, resolving not to yield. Setting out on a 3-hour journey, I arrived at the hospital parking lot, my nerves taut with anticipation. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity as I scoured the lot, my senses heightened. Amidst the sea of vehicles, I discerned 2 individuals in suits, unmistakably law enforcement. Approaching them with firm resolve, I demanded verification of their authority. "Show me your badges," I commanded, holding steadfast. Though met with evident displeasure, they complied with my request. Kneeling down, I pressed for information, only to learn that they had secured Mia's car, yet remained unaware of any recent activity surrounding it since their arrival. Upon learning that the authorities had already inquired about my wife, I offered insincere gratitude and asserted my intent to do the same, despite my mounting frustration. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed I was rapidly accruing new acquaintances in law enforcement circles. At the hospital's front desk, my inquiries about my wife yielded no results, mirroring their ignorance regarding the parked car outside. Opting to join the surveillance effort, I saw no reason to conceal my intentions and requested permission to observe from the backseat of their vehicle. Perhaps it was the first time I had caught a cop off guard since this ordeal began, but to my surprise, they acquiesced, and I settled in beside them. Over the next hour, I briefed them on the scant information I possessed. As their shift drew to a close, they granted me permission to maintain watch over the car, albeit with a clear directive: no interference whatsoever. Their instructions were unequivocal. If anyone approached the vehicle, whether from the hospital or arriving separately, I was to refrain from action and simply notify them. The message was clear: observe and report without deviation. I nodded in acknowledgement, understanding the gravity of their directive. Remember, there's a slim chance they have your wife, and could lead us to her, but it's more likely they simply purchased the car from someone else. However, they might assist us in tracking down the seller. It's crucial that you refrain from any action. Do you understand?" The officer reiterated, his tone grave. For the first time since this ordeal began, the gravity of the situation fully sunk in, and I nodded in solemn agreement. Returning to my car, I assumed a vigilant posture, hunched down in my seat, my gaze fixated on Mia's car for the next 3 agonizing hours. Only the most urgent necessity could pry me away from my post, and even then, I executed the quickest restroom visit in recorded history, darting in and out of the hospital so swiftly that I was still adjusting my clothing as I hurried back through the lobby. An hour later, my heart lurched as a figure approached Mia's car. Breath caught in my throat. I watched in disbelief as Mia herself emerged. She retrieved something from the vehicle before heading back into the hospital. Instinct urged me to follow, maintaining a cautious distance, wary of alerting her to my presence. Approximately 20 yards behind her, I shadowed her into the hospital, tracking her movements until she reached an elevator, her final destination the 3rd floor. Peering into a room, my confusion mounted as I observed Mia, seated beside a man's bed, her hand clasped tightly in his. A mix of anger and bewilderment surged within me as I cleared my throat, prompting Mia to turn and confront my presence in the doorway. Her reaction was swift as she fainted before me. Summoning a nurse to attend to her, I seized the opportunity to scrutinize the man in the bed. A stranger to me, he held no familial resemblance, yet to Mia, his significance eclipsed even that of her marriage and family. In that moment, it became painfully evident that he held a place of paramount importance in her life, superseding all else, including me. As one mystery seemed to unravel, another emerged, casting a shadow of uncertainty over the scene. While the nurse tended to Mia, I seized the moment to notify the local detectives of her discovery. They instructed us to remain in place, promising to arrive promptly, and I provided them with the room number. With each passing moment, the impending confrontation filled me with a sense of foreboding, replacing the fear that had previously gripped my heart. As Mia regained her composure, her demeanor bordered on hysteria. Her responses were limited to shaken headshakes as I implored her for answers. "Why, Mia? Who is this man? Why did you vanish like that? Why keep us in the dark? Why not let us know you were safe? Mia, please, what's happening?" I pressed, my tone a mix of calm resolve and icy disbelief. Though she appeared on the verge of speaking several times, her resolve crumbled each time, tears streaming down her face. Standing there, waiting in limbo, my mind reeled with questions and uncertainties until the detectives arrived, relieving me of the burden. Stepping aside, I allowed them to take charge, but to my surprise, they'd promptly requested my exit from the room. One detective accompanied me, firing off a barrage of inquiries. I recounted the sequence of events truthfully, from witnessing Mia's approach to confronting her in the room, though I swiftly clarified that confrontation might have been an ill-fitting term, assuring him vehemently that I had not inflicted any harm upon her. Yet as the interrogation intensified upon learning of the nurse's discovery of Mia on the floor, I found myself subjected to even deeper scrutiny. Meanwhile, his partner engaged in conversation with Mia, seeking answers of their own. Eventually, whether through my own persuasion or Mia's testimony, the detectives seemed convinced that I bore no responsibility for my wife's distress. However, their insistence on my departure persisted, prompting a decisive ultimatum from me. "Mia, if I walk out that door, I'm filing for divorce. Do you hear me?" My declaration triggered another wave of hysteria from Mia, her pleas for me to stay echoing in the room. Refusing to yield, I locked eyes with the detective, asserting firmly, "I'm not leaving until I have some answers." After some deliberation, they relented, permitting my return to the room. With a steely resolve, I broached the delicate subject matter, seeking clarity amidst the confusion. Yet, Mia's responses offered little solace, cloaked in cryptic half-truths and veiled references. He was an old flame from her school days, her first love, now facing his mortality alone. Beneath these sparse revelations lay a tapestry of unspoken complexities, leaving me to parse through the silence in search of understanding. "How have you managed to live for 2 weeks without using your credit card?" I pressed, breaking the heavy silence that hung between us. Maya remained silent for a prolonged moment before finally confessing, "I've been staying at his place." "So, you know where he lives?" I inquired, my tone tinged with disbelief. "Of course," she replied tersely. "And you have a key?" I continued, probing for more information. She simply nodded, avoiding eye contact as she stared at the floor. The weight of my accusation loomed heavy in the air, the consequences of being wrong a daunting specter. "How long have you had a key to his place?" I demanded, my frustration simmering beneath the surface. Maya's response was a non-committal shrug, her silence speaking volumes. The realization hit me like a freight train. 2 weeks of agonizing uncertainty waiting in the dark for answers. "How long, Mia?" I pressed, my voice edged with a mix of anger and despair. Her continued silence spoke volumes, confirming my worst fears without uttering a single word. In that moment, my mind recoiled from the overwhelming truth, the numbness of shock enveloping me. "Okay. At the very least, you owe me a visit to his place. I need to see where you've been staying," I declared, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation. Mia's horror was palpable as panic seized her, but ultimately, she relented, nodding in resignation. With a heavy heart, she retrieved her coat, and we made our way to the car. "I'll drive," I asserted firmly, the weight of the situation heavy upon me. "And then I'll bring you back." Her surprise was evident, but she acquiesced nonetheless, accepting the terms of our journey into the unknown. By then, it seemed the detectives had deemed the situation a personal affair. With the final admonition to avoid any foolish actions, they departed, leaving us to navigate the tumultuous aftermath alone. Maya remained largely silent during the drive, her voice only breaking the silence when necessary to provide directions. In a hushed tone, she murmured, "They mentioned we might have to reimburse the police for their time." Though the implication of her words stirred a myriad of questions within me, I opted to remain silent, allowing the matter to hang in the air between us. As we pulled into the driveway of a modest townhouse, a sense of apprehension gripped me, knowing that the answers to my questions likely lay within its walls. With Mia leading the way, we entered, and as I traversed through the living room, I couldn't help but notice familiar items. A pair of my wife's shoes by the sofa, her favorite scarf draped over a chair. Ignoring Mia's plea to refrain, I pressed forward, my heart pounding in my chest. Entering the master bedroom, the evidence became irrefutable. Mia's belongings littered the room. Her clothes were strewn across the unmade bed and chair, and her makeup adorned the dresser. It wasn't until I opened the closet and beheld duplicates of her favorite dress and a collection of shoes in her size and style that all doubts dissipated. These were not items hastily packed for a trip. They were possessions meticulously kept here. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I realized that if I were to delve further into the drawers, I would undoubtedly find her intimate apparel. The room exuded an atmosphere not of everyday habitation, but rather of rendezvous, reserved for fleeting moments of shared intimacy and the warmth of entwined bodies after a night of dinner, dancing, and clandestine liaisons. Retreating to the living room, I found Mia perched on the edge of a chair, her gaze fixed upon the floor in silent contemplation. "So, is there anything you need to tell me?" I queried, my voice heavy with resignation. She shook her head slowly, her silence speaking volumes. "How long, Mia? It's evident this isn't a platonic relationship. How long?" I pressed, my frustration mounting as she shrugged, feigning ignorance despite her obvious awareness. "And who is he to you?" I probed further, steeling myself for her response. After a prolonged silence, she confessed in a feeble voice, "He was my first. We were together when we were in school." I debated whether she referred to high school or college, ultimately concluding that the distinction mattered little in the grand scheme of betrayal. "How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" I demanded, a mixture of anger and anguish seeping into my tone. Her reaction was visceral, a sudden jerk of her head betraying her reluctance to confront the truth. "We reconnected about 7 years ago," she admitted, her voice trailing off as she recalled the gradual progression from innocent lunches to clandestine rendezvous. "Before you slept together," I interjected, forcing her to confront the harsh reality. She nodded slowly, confirming my worst suspicions. "So you've been cheating on me for 6 years. How do you manage it? Does he come here? Do you go to his place?" I fired off, my bitterness palpable. Her immediate response was defensive, her head snapping up as she vehemently denied any encroachment upon our shared space. "I've never brought him back to our home. I swear it. I wouldn't do that to you," she insisted, her anger palpable. I nodded, a cruel satisfaction settling over me. "So you'll betray me, but you draw the line at bringing him into our house." "How noble," I remarked, the sting of betrayal searing through me. Though her fury was evident, she couldn't refute any of it. Following a lengthy silence, Mia uttered the words that every betrayed spouse dreads to hear. "I never stopped loving you. He never took anything from you. I swear it. It was just a few nights every year, and you had me forever." It was a line straight from the cheater's playbook, a feeble attempt to justify her infidelity. Yet, despite recognizing the futility of arguing, I couldn't suppress the need to confront her deceit. "He took at least some of the love you said you had for me," I countered bitterly. "You kept a part of your heart for him. Because of him, you lied to me repeatedly. You took vows with me, but you gave him a part of yourself that you said was only for me. Don't tell me he never took anything from me. He took it all, even if you don't think so." Mia wept, and I stood there in silent resignation, knowing that our relationship had been irreparably shattered. The urge to lash out, to seek vengeance, briefly flickered within me, but I quelled it with a heavy sigh. There was no point. He wasn't coming home. "Come on, Mia. I'll take you back to your lover's bedside," I announced wearily, my voice devoid of emotion. Mia's tears flowed anew, but I had no solace to offer her. My heart was broken, and the pain was unbearable. As I drove her back to the hospital, Mia pleaded with me, her desperation palpable. "Michael, please, just give me a little time. He has no one. I can't let him die alone. I'll be home soon," she implored, her words punctuated by sobs. "I'll be home soon, and we can get back to our life together. Please, I do love you. I swear it." I simply nodded, my silence a testament to the finality of our relationship. By then, I think she knew it was over. The journey back home passed in a blur, my mind numb with the weight of betrayal and disappointment. 2 weeks of anguish and uncertainty, all the false hope and reassurances from friends and family, now reduced to ashes. I was drained, physically, emotionally, utterly hollow. I stumbled through the door, collapsing into my favorite chair, consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Time became a meaningless blur as I grappled with the devastating reality of my shattered marriage. The first call came, piercing through the silence like a knife, jolting me back to the present. It was her parents, their voices tinged with concern and urgency, seeking answers I wasn't sure I had. In that moment, I realized I had fled 200 miles without a word to anyone. Briefly, I toyed with the idea of sparing Mia the embarrassment, but the last remnants of my love for her crumbled away as I recounted the painful truth to Thomas and Peggy. Their disbelief mirrored my own initial denial, until the stark details of what I had discovered in his townhouse left no room for doubt. Whether they believed me or not was inconsequential. My marriage was irrevocably over. It was a bitter truth that pierced through my heart and settled like a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. Mia's betrayal, years of deceit and infidelity, rendered any hope of reconciliation futile. With a heavy heart, I reached out to her friends, holding nothing back as I divulged the painful truth. While I struggled to contain my anger, I refused to shield Mia from the consequences of her actions. Next came the hardest call of all, speaking to our children. I tried to soften the blow, but honesty demanded that I reveal the grim reality. Their mother was with her lover, who lay dying in a hospital bed. They recoiled in disbelief, clinging to a glimmer of hope that I knew to be false. When they asked if forgiveness was possible, I could offer no assurances, only a haunting admission that trust had been irreparably shattered. As I apologized for the upheaval our family faced, I made a painful decision to end our marriage, sparing them the burden of deceit. Yet in my haste to shield them from further pain, I forgot that they were still unaware of their mother's whereabouts. I urged them not to inform her, emphasizing the need for her to spend what little time remained by his side. Despite their protests, they reluctantly acquiesced, understanding the gravity of the situation. 2 weeks later, he passed away, and Maya returned home to find me gone. Divorce papers were served a week after her return. I didn't flee town or vanish into obscurity. Instead, I simply relocated to an apartment until I found a new place to call home. It was a decision made with the well-being of our children in mind, ensuring they could visit us both without inconvenience. Mia made attempts to change my mind, appearing at my office or my new residence, pleading and bargaining, but my resolve remained steadfast. Despite her tears and ultimatums, the irreparable damage wrought by 6 years of betrayal, and 7 if you count the covered lunches, dinners, and dancing, left no room for reconciliation. Lies had corroded the foundation of our marriage, eroding the trust I had once held so dearly. It's been 2 years since the finalization of our divorce. I don't pry, but our children inform me that Mia's existence has become routine, work and home, with no semblance of a social life. It pains me to witness her suffering, but I am powerless to offer solace. As for myself, the wounds have yet to fully heal, though the passage of time has dulled the sharp edges of pain. While I haven't ventured into the realm of dating, I find myself noticing other women, signaling the slow reawakening of my romantic inclinations. However, trust remains a distant prospect, particularly outside the confines of professional interactions. The reasons behind Mia's betrayal elude me, and I doubt I'll ever glean insight into her motivations or rationalizations. Perhaps I could seek answers, but what purpose would it serve? Her actions were her own, and she evidently found a way to reconcile them with her conscience at the time. There's something I've never disclosed to anyone before. I never learned his name. A man lay on his deathbed, and a townhouse served as the backdrop for my wife's infidelity. For me, that was sufficient. Revenge was futile in the face of mortality, and forgiveness proved elusive for a spouse who had breached the bonds of trust so egregiously. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.